G'day. A lot of people have asked me for my opinion on the new regulations that CAA has imposed on model flyers, drone operators and children with their toys. I'm going to give my opinion, but first of all I have to say that I'm always reluctant to criticise anything unless I've got something to offer that I think is better. We're always looking to improve things, and criticism on its own is useless. What's needed is constructive criticism and options that maybe the people who created the regulations hadn't thought of because they consulted with the wrong people perhaps. I don't know. Anyway, let's look at the regulations. First of all, let's look at what the regulations are trying to achieve, because obviously there's a problem. You don't regulate for no reason. You see a problem, you try and regulate to stop or mitigate the problem. And what is the problem? Well, let's have a look. Models have been flown in this country for decades and there's never been any public outcry. There's never been any threat to property of any significance. No one's ever been killed by a radio-controlled model. So what has changed? Why is it that now suddenly we're seeing regulators coming out with all guns blazing trying to change things? Well, I'll show you what the problem is. I happen to have one just here. This is it. Now, it's these things. It's these very low-cost, highly capable multi-rotor drones that really seem to be the crux of the problem. The technology has changed so much in recent years that now anyone can go out and buy one of these and use it. And they can buy it and use it without having gone through the traditional hobby sort of procedure of learning all about how to put them together and learning how to fly them and learning what's right and what's wrong. These are a consumer item. You can go onto eBay and buy one of these. You can go onto a Chinese retailer and buy one of these. And within a week, it's at your back doorstep. You can put a battery in it and go and make a nuisance of yourself. That's the problem. So obviously CAA and the regulators around the world are currently trying to figure out a solution to this problem. But I think they're doing a poor job because they don't understand the process of changing people's behaviour, because this isn't a problem about drones. It's not these things, it's not the drone, it's the people who are using them that is the problem. And so drones are getting a bad rap because on their own, it's like guns. Guns don't kill people, and bullets kill people, but people kill people. All things can be used for good and bad. You can cut the Sunday roast with a nice knife, you can go and stab someone with it. It doesn't make the knife intrinsically a bad thing. It doesn't mean you should ban knives or regulate knives. It means you need to make sure that people are not going to be misusing these items, be they a drone or a carving knife or a gun. There's simple stuff. Regulators have faced this problem for a long time. Unfortunately, I don't think they learn much from their mistakes. So I'm going to first of all go through the process that I see is critical to coming up with regulation. Before I criticise anything, I'll show you how I go about coming up with rules or regulations to try and change people's behaviour. Right, as I say, the first step is to identify the problem. And it's not the drones, it's the people. It's the people operating them. And by and large, most people aren't a problem. There are such a large number of these drones out there now, and by percentage-wise, such a small number of problems have been reported that it's safe to say that the vast majority of people using these things do not represent a threat to the people or the property of the country. People aren't being killed, property isn't being destroyed. It's only a few people that are causing the problems, and those are the only people whose behaviour we need to change. Those are the only people who really we should be trying to regulate. Forget about the people that aren't causing a problem. Obviously, the existing rules and regulations are sufficient to make sure they don't pose a problem. We have reports of drones being flown near airports and endangering full-size aircraft. Well, that's illegal already under the old regulations. That has never been legal. In the USA, you're not allowed to fly a model within 5 miles of an airport. In Australia, it's 3 nautical miles. In New Zealand, it's 4 kilometres. So anyone that does endanger an aircraft with a model or a drone is already breaking the regulations. Right? So why would someone do that? Well, it boils down to 2 groups of people. First of all, there is the ignorant. The ignorance is the first issue. The ignorant people, they don't know. They got no clue. They don't realise that this store-bought drone they got from China shouldn't be flown near an airport, or shouldn't be flown above 400 feet, or it shouldn't be flown over a crowd of people. It's pure and utter ignorance. That means that no amount of regulation will change their behaviour unless you tell them about it, right? They obviously don't know about the existing regulations, or they wouldn't do the things they're doing. So the fault isn't that of the regulations, it's the fault of the regulator whose job it is to promulgate those regulations to the people they affect. They're not doing a good job of telling people what they can and can't do. That's not the fault of the people, it's not the fault of the drones, it's the fault of the people responsible for advising them. They've done a poor job. CAA is very much responsible there. I think they've relied heavily on Model Flying New Zealand in the past, and now that the hobby has changed, that doesn't work. Model Flying New Zealand represent less than 1/3 of the hobby in this country. So if you tell Model Flying New Zealand, you're only reaching 30% of the people you need to reach. The other 60% may fall into the ignorant category, right? Now, the second group of people who are problems are those who express arrogance, the arrogant people, the people who say, I know about your regulations, but I'm not going to follow them. Oh, I'm going to do my own thing. Now, they're a real problem. But again, if you bring out new regulations, new rules, harsher penalties, it's not going to change these people's behaviour because they've already said, we consider ourselves to be above the law, therefore none of these laws will worry us, we're just going to do what we do. So again, the folly of believing that more regulations, stronger regulations, harsher penalties are going to change the behaviour of either these people or these people is obvious. You know, regulators, I mean, it's like to a hammer, everything is a nail. And to a regulator, every problem can be solved by regulation. That's the belief, but I'm saying that's not quite true. Because I'm in my 70th decade now of life and I've watched people's behaviour. I've studied human behaviour. It's a really interesting thing to watch. And you don't really change the problem people's behaviour with laws and regulations. I mean, we have laws that basically have made it illegal to steal, to rape, to murder, to speed on the highway, but those things happen every day because there are certain groups of people who choose to ignore the law and you're never going to regulate them into compliance. So there's two ways we've got to reach or change the behaviour of these two groups of people. How are we going to do it? Well, we've already shown that regulations are ineffective when people don't know about them, and they're ineffective when you're dealing with people who express arrogance and contempt for those regulations. But there is a solution. There's solutions to both those. The first one, of course, is inform people. Let them know. And that's what I try to do. I let people know. I've done a video explaining these new regulations to those people it affects, and I try and eliminate ignorance through my teaching. Education, information, knowledge. That's the thing that basically wipes that problem off the board. But that leaves us with the arrogance. How are we going to deal with the problem of people who are arrogant and refuse to follow the regulations? Right, there are two things that will change the behaviour of someone who expresses contempt or arrogance towards the rules and regulations. The first one is understanding. Now, a lot of people say, oh, that's a crazy rule, I'm not going to do that, that's stupid, because they don't understand why the regulation is there. They don't understand the ramifications of what they're doing when they break that regulation and the potential consequences of doing that. So again, this falls down to education. We've got to explain to these people why that regulation is there and why they should follow it. And if you do that, a lot of the people who are in the arrogant category will start to become compliant. They will comply with the regulations because they understand why they're there. If you just tell someone, don't do that, and you don't explain why, then the natural reaction from many people is, oh, bugger you, I'll do it. Because, you know, people have this sort of, you know, they get their back up and they don't want to do it because they've been told to do it. But if you explain to someone why it's not a good idea to do that, you're far more likely to get them to comply and say, oh, okay, yeah, righto. And the other thing that is critical, absolutely crucial, is respect. Now, people tend to follow the instructions of people they respect. If you earn somebody's respect or earn a respect of a group of people and you ask them to do something or you advise them to do something, it's much more likely that they will follow that advice or that instruction. If you don't have their respect, then they will just go, bugger you. That's understandable. It's human nature again. So the job of the regulator is not to make regulations and say, that's it, we've done our job. The job of the regulator is to educate, inform, and create a culture of respect within the groups they're trying to control. Those are far more important than the penalties and the dotting the I's and crossing the T's. That's all completely irrelevant. Regulations don't count for diddly squat if you can't convince the arrogant people to have respect and give them some understanding of what you're trying to achieve, right? And I think in this regard, CAA's regulations are a bit of a failure. I'm sorry, they are a bit of a failure. I don't think they've been through this process. I think they've just looked at, you know, the typical bureaucratic stance, oh, we'll regulate, without understanding why they're regulating and without understanding that regulations alone are useless, utterly useless. Sure, all those other people, the ones who aren't the problem, the law-abiding people, they will follow the regulations, but they're not the problem. So you're modifying the behaviour of a group that has already proven itself not to be a problem. There's no point in that. There's absolutely no point on earth because they don't cause the issue. They are not the problem. So yeah, CAA needs to go back to school and learn about modifying human behaviour. And it's not a job that a bureaucrat seems to cope with at all well, based on my reading of the regulations, the new regulations that have come out. But okay, let's take a look at those regulations and let's see how we can possibly come up with better ones that would meet the requirements of convincing the ignorant or convincing the arrogant people to be compliant and informing the ignorant people exactly what their obligations, responsibilities and liabilities are. Now, the first failure of CAA's regulations are they don't take any heed of the word respect. The hobby in this country has an enviable reputation of safety and responsibility. They respect the rights of other people, they respect the rights of property owners, and they respect the safety of people. And because of that, there have been no deaths, no third-party injuries I'm aware of, and very little in the way of property damage. That's a very enviable track record. CAA has shown no respect for that. They haven't. What they've said is, we're going to lump you genuine hobbyists in with the idiots who are making a nuisance of themselves flying Phantom 2s in the wrong place, and all the kids with their toys. And that's disrespectful. That shows no respect for what the hobby has achieved to date. And remember, the problem people are the people who have no respect for CAA and therefore have no respect for the regulations. Big fail, CAA. First thing you should have done is acknowledged that the hobby is not the problem. It's not the people out there with their AXNs and you know, flying on a Sunday afternoon in the flying fields and in the paddocks and the parks. They're not the problem. So why are you lumbering them with those horrible new regulations and constraints and restrictions? That is a big mistake, big mistake. You've got to give them credit for their track record to date. Failure. Secondly, CAA have demonstrated their ignorance. They really have, and it's hard to have respect for someone who themselves has no real understanding of that which they're trying to control. Now, as I said, it's very easy to be on the back foot in this field because of the rapid changes in technology, but there's some really simple stuff that makes a lot of sense that CAA have completely overlooked. For example, the little toys. Now, a lot of countries around the world have special dispensation for toys and very small, low-risk craft. In Australia, anything under 100 grams is not covered by the regulations. That used to be the case in New Zealand. And as far as I'm aware, I had not heard of one single incident involving a model or a toy under 100 grams. Yet, suddenly, they've become a threat. Where is the evidence to back that up? There is none. So, basically, CAA are treating us like idiots, wanting us to believe that suddenly the little tiny toys are now a threat to the national airspace or the public safety. It's not true, CAA. You're not going to get anyone's respect by treating them like idiots. I'm sorry, but you are treating them like idiots. It's not going to work. Remember, you've got to get respect from these people, and that's going to work. You also need to inform them, give them reasons why you're creating the regulations you do. What is the reason for regulating children's toy? I can think of none. Think of none at all. So again, you failed on those two issues. Informing and gaining respect. Complete fail. And also, it goes a bit further. I mean, one of the problems we have in New Zealand is that there's a bit of rivalry between Australia and New Zealand. You know, Australia is always trying to do better than New Zealand. New Zealand's always trying to do better than Australia. There's always a one-upmanship going on. And that has never been more apparent than in the regulations regarding drones and model aircraft. Because I'll tell you what, over in Australia, they've got their heads screwed on. I mean, let me give you a few quotes from some of Australia's CASA people. Now, CASA is the equivalent of CAA in Australia. And senior CASA officer Jim Coyne says, he says of model drones and model planes weighing less than 2 kilograms, the safety risk posed by this group is negligible, comparable to being hit with a cricket ball. And we don't regulate cricket balls. The potential for harm and consequence is very low. Now, this is from an official in CASA. This is their officer, Jim Coyne, saying this. It's not me making it up. This is what CASA says. And he says, we talk about a harmless UAS causing minimal harm to a person. If it hits them on the head, it will give them a headache. If it hits them on the back, it will give them a bit of a bruise, but it's not going to kill you. Now, this is the kind of stuff that generates respect. I respect Jim Coyne because he's telling it like it is. He's not trying to convince me that a 20-gram child's toy is going to kill someone or bring down a full-size aircraft. He's not treating me like an imbecile. He's not insulting my intelligence. He has my respect. He has my respect, and that's one of the key things, remember. It goes on, though. Another member of CASA, CASA's Director of Aviation Safety, John McCormick, he says, I can't write a regulation I know I can't enforce. Well, I can, but it's bad law. Okay, he admits there's no point in making regulations you can't enforce. Another piece of common sense that shows CASA's people know what they're doing. They understand the problem and they understand people. Because my other complaint about the civil aviation regulations is CAA have come out publicly and stated, we do not intend to police these regulations. Honestly, they have stated that. It's in the media, we do not intend to police these regulations. Oh my God, what do you think, what message does that send to these arrogant people, the arrogant people who are the real problem? They're saying, oh, well, there's even less reason for us to follow these regulations. We're not going to get caught. They're not going to police them. Ooh, we'll just go and do what we like. Face palm for CAA. What a fiasco. What a dog's breakfast. And it shows that the lack of thought, the lack of planning, the lack of understanding that's gone into creating these regulations on the part of CAA, they've just completely lost the plot. They give me the impression they're a bunch of bureaucrats eating scones, drinking coffee, and treating this as a game without identifying the problem and the factors involved in the problem and how to come up with solutions. Regulations alone, not a solution, as I've said. So what do you do with these people? Anyway, so we have regulations which are harsh and draconian, which only are going to affect the people who obey regulations, who aren't the problem, and then we're telling the rest of the people who are the problem, don't worry, we're not going to bother enforcing our regulations. Oh, man. So what else is wrong with the CAA regulations? Well, for a start, we have this property permission thing. Now, it makes sense in some respects. Now, I don't, like anyone else, I don't want someone flying a model drone over my house or my car, because if they have an accident, it could damage my house, could damage my car. I mean, one of these things could fall onto the roof, catch fire, there goes your house. So, okay, that's fair, that's reasonable. I understand that, and I fully support that. If you're flying over an occupied area, you must get the permission of the property owner and the occupants. That's good common sense. But if I'm out in the middle of nowhere, and I'm flying, good example, tourism, drone tourism, big thing now. People are taking their drones everywhere. And when that new Lily drone gets launched, that'll be a standard part of most tourists, a lot of tourists' baggage is the Lily drone. Now, if I go somewhere around the countryside and I see a wonderful scenic vista and I want to get up there with my quad or whatever and just get some really great video of the sun setting over the mountains or something, and it's miles from anywhere, and there's nobody around, and what am I supposed to do? Under the current regulations, I have to find out who owns that property. Then I have to contact them and get permission. Now, if you're on a 2-week stay in New Zealand and you're driving past a wonderful vista, you're not going to say, okay, well, let's go into town, nearest town, look it up, find out who owns it, give them a ring, come back. No, it doesn't happen that way. It's ridiculous. Where is the safety issue? Because CAA has to be looking, their purview is safety. It's not privacy, it's nothing else. They're solely responsible for safety. So CAA, again, need to explain, need to justify their regulation by telling us why they have deemed it to be unsafe to fly a child's toy over a grassy paddock 50 miles from the nearest town or person. I mean, unless you can give us the justification, then you are treating us like imbeciles again, and it's not right. So I'm happy for the property permission thing to exist in towns and built up areas and over houses and things. You shouldn't be able to fly over anyone's house without their permission, but if it's a grassy field or a park or a reserve in the middle of nowhere, then why? And that's unreasonable, and I don't think that's a good regulation at all. Now the next regulation, FPV. CAA says we must have a spotter at all times, and I don't agree with that. Why don't I agree with that? Well, again, you're treating us like idiots, because CAA justify this by saying when you put your FPV goggles on, you're only able to see through a little camera on the front of your model, and therefore you lack situational awareness. And you need somebody who isn't wearing goggles to look at the model, and so they can tell if there's an airplane coming into the area or if there's people coming into the area, so we can retain safety. And sometimes that's true. Sometimes that's justified. If you're flying your model, a long way away, then you need to do that. Or if you're flying in an area where there might be a lot of people, you need to do that. But this rule is ridiculous when you consider that it still applies if you've got a farm of your own, you've got 3-metre high fences with barbed wire, and you've got a stand of pine trees in the middle of it, and you're flying your mini quad through those pine trees under the trees. You still have to have an observer under these regulations. That's ridiculous. How do you justify that? Well, I asked CAA to justify that. And they came back to me and said, you never know when there could be a helicopter passing overhead that has to perform an emergency auto-rotation landing. And therefore you need someone looking out. And, face palm again. Again, they're treating people like idiots. And if you want to gain someone's respect, you do not treat them like an idiot. You do not insult their intelligence by drawing such long bows. How long a bow is it? Well, I asked CAA to provide me with the incident reports for all the emergency helicopter auto-rotations into areas where a model was likely to be flown in the last 2 years, the last 3 years actually. They didn't even reply, because there probably have been none, right? There have probably been no incidents. I also asked them to just check and see how many people had been injured by meteorites in the same period around the world. Well, when the meteorite soared across Russia a couple of years ago, over 1,200 people were injured by that meteor. It was a meteor, then it became a meteorite. 1,200 people were injured. So, statistically speaking, you are far more likely to be injured by a meteor or a meteorite or an asteroid than by a helicopter having to do an emergency rotation into the area where you're flying your model. So that is just, I say, it is absolute lunacy. You cannot expect people to respect you if you give us these lame justifications for your regulations. Now, having said that, yes, I say spotters are important in certain applications. But if CAA want to improve their rule, because remember I said I'm going to offer alternative and solutions. If they want to improve their rule, then they just need to change it so that it reads, a spotter is required when flying FPV whenever it is necessary to ensure safety. That's all you've got to say, whenever it is necessary to ensure safety. That means, yes, if you're flying at the park or if you're flying in an area where you're going to fly a little way away, you'll need a spotter. If you're flying in your own property under a stand of pine trees, you don't need a spotter, and you shouldn't have to break the law or the regulations to do that. That just makes a mockery of things. And also, it raises another issue. We talk about that situational awareness. You can only see out the camera. Well, I'm sorry, but CAA, the guys there obviously have never flown FPV. Obviously never flown FPV. Because I've flown FPV a lot, and I'm sure many of the people watching this have. And what happens is, and even out here, I'm at an airfield, and when I'm at the airfield, I almost always hear a plane coming before I see it. Modern aircraft, even the modern aircraft, they don't have mufflers, they have a straight exhaust, they have propellers chopping the air up. They're loud, they're very noisy devices. You can hear them from a couple of miles away. You can't see them until they're about a mile away. You can usually hear them before you can see them. So a CAA telling me that when I put on a set of video goggles, suddenly I become deaf and stupid? Because if I'm flying FPV and I hear a plane and it sounds like it's coming closer, I will land. I will land my little mini quad. Even though it's only 2 or 3 meters above the ground, I'll land it because that's the safe thing to do. CAA are telling me, no, you're so stupid that you wouldn't do that. Well, I'm sorry, but you're insulting my intelligence again and you're not earning my respect. And certainly if not earning my respect, you're not earning the respect of the problem people who are showing such contempt for the regulations already. So there you go. I've offered a solution. Just change that so that if people are flying in an area and in a way where it is safe to fly FPV without a spotter, let them do so without fear of prosecution. It's showing respect for them and respecting the fact that people have been flying FPV for a decade now, and there's never been an incident of a FPV model hitting a full-size aircraft or injuring a person or damaging property. So show some respect for the people and they'll show some respect back to you. That's simple message to CAA and all regulators. Now, finally, this issue of wings. Now, as I say, you have to have wings or an RPAS certification to fly a model or a drone within 4 kilometers of an airfield. And I mean, that's not stupid. I've got to say, that's not stupid. You can't, if you're flying in an area where you're more likely to encounter full-size aircraft, then you should be able to have some method of proving your competence and your understanding of the rules and the regulations. Where CAA have gone completely wrong is vesting that power in Model Flying New Zealand. Because as everyone who watches my channels knows, Model Flying New Zealand is an incredibly political organisation. They're only interested in their own members, and they choose to exclude people like myself who have clearly demonstrated the necessary knowledge, understanding, competence, because it doesn't suit them. Because I criticise them, I cannot join their organisation. I cannot have wings. It is utter irony that probably the most qualified person in the country to talk about safety and who has demonstrated safety and who actually does positive things to ensure safety by educating, informing, making videos like this, I am the only person who is forbidden in the entire country to hold wings. It shows the sheer lunacy of the situation where CAA have effectively set up a special arrangement with Model Flying New Zealand. Now, there are other organisations that can issue RPAS certification, but I don't want RPAS certification, do I? A lot of people like myself, they don't need RPAS certification. All they need is to prove that they have their flying ability, they have an understanding of the rules, and that they can operate safely within 4 kilometres of an airfield. And this is becoming increasingly important. Now, we have the shielded operation, that's fine, but there are other instances when it is safe to fly a model within 4K of an airfield without operating in a shielded environment. My goodness, I did it here for many, many years at an airfield. Never had any incidents. The only incident involving a model in a full-size aircraft was caused by the president of the local Model Flying New Zealand club. And, well, it says it all, really, doesn't it? So, yes, CAA need to get their fingers out of their backside and realise that Model Flying New Zealand only represents now about 1/3 of the hobby. And the 2/3 of the hobby that they need to reach are not interested in Model Flying New Zealand. If we look at the figures, Barry Lennox, not Barry Lennox, she's the old one. What is it? Jonathan Shaw, the current president of Model Flying New Zealand, published an editorial that I think most of you have seen, but I'll link to it in the description of this video in case you haven't. He published an editorial stating that the membership of Model Flying New Zealand was about 2,200 people. And I know for a fact that when 3 years ago they had 2,200 people. So although the hobby has grown by a factor of almost 3 in the last 3 years, Model Flying New Zealand's membership has remained the same. So people coming into this hobby, they don't give a damn about Model Flying New Zealand, probably because they've seen the way that they have abused their power and how politically motivated they are, so they don't want to know about them. So CAA, by simply favouring Model Flying New Zealand and giving this privilege to Model Flying New Zealand, are disadvantaging the rest of the hobby. That's not right. It's not CAA's job to play politics, CAA's job to preserve safety. So I call on them to say, right, we need to have some other independent parties who can issue these WINGS certification, not RPAS, just WINGS, which is a really simple process. And it has to be free from politics, free from bias, free from prejudice. And if that doesn't happen, then again, how can we have respect for an organisation that operates in that way when they choose to align themselves with another organisation that is really, really, well, you know what I think about them. Anyway, okay, I've talked enough about the problems. Let's talk about the solutions that I see, ways to improve civil aviation regulations as they currently stand. First of all, separate out drones from radio-controlled models. I mean, the problem, as we've already discussed, is not the people who genuinely fly radio-controlled models for recreation. It's the people who buy the store-bought drones and don't know what the hell they're doing. So we need to separate that out. Don't tar genuine model flyers with the brush you're using to brand the droners. Don't do that. Now, this is a difficult problem, but I'm not going to do all CAA's work for them. You can work out how to do that yourself, CAA. I'm sure it's not beyond you, but you need to draw that distinction. By doing that, you're showing respect for the people who genuinely fly models and have built up that enviable track record of safety and responsibility. You've got to show respect for them. Secondly, put back that 100-gram lower limit, which means toys aren't a problem anymore. Toys aren't included. The children are not going to have to worry whether they're going to get pinged for flying their little toy helicopter down the park when they, as the guy from CASA says, this poses no threat to anybody. And he's talking about up to 2 kg. If we're talking 100 grams, don't insult our intelligence by claiming that they pose a threat to anybody, any significant threat. When we've got people playing with rugby balls and cricket balls and everything in the parks as it is, and they're completely unregulated. Don't insult our intelligence. Then you might get some respect and more compliance for these regulations. Now, then spotter when necessary for FPV. Do not use this blanket thing. You must always have a spotter because sometimes it's not applicable, and you insult our intelligence by trying to tell us it is, because you never know when a passing helicopter might need to auto-rotate into the forest where you're flying, and your little mini quad flying 1 metre above the ground could be the difference between life and death. Stop treating us like children, and then we might behave like adults and follow the regulations. Also, permission for property when appropriate. Not a blanket, you must get permission everywhere, because sometimes it's simply not appropriate. It's not required for safety, and it's impractical. And if you make regulations too hard to comply with, people will not comply with them. And there's a situation, as a human behaviour. People who, if you make the regulations easy enough to comply with, people will comply. But if you start making it difficult, as is the case with permission, then people might think, well, this regulation is too hard to comply with, so we won't bother. And then you've set the seed of non-compliance. You've created a culture where people believe, okay, it's all right to ignore some of the regulations if it's too hard to comply. So then next time it comes around and says, well, we're only 3 kilometres from an airport, but hey, these regulations, you can break them, that's not a problem. We've done it before. So you need to make them so that make sense. And also, as I say, you've got to explain to people the justification for these regulations. Don't treat them like fools. They know that it's stupid to require by law that someone flying a little toy helicopter, at a public, some public land somewhere where there's no one around needs to get permission to do so. And then dismantle Model Flying New Zealand's monopoly and privileges that they enjoy. They only represent a third of the hobby. There was a time when they represented virtually the entire hobby. That's gone. That's history. That's over. They're such a tiny percentage of the hobby now that by giving them the special privilege, you are actively discriminating against people who don't want to join a highly political group of people living in the 1960s. They want to go out and enjoy the hobby safely and while showing respect for person and property. They don't want to be forced into doing this. I mean, at the moment, if they want to fly within 4K of an airfield, they have no option but to join Model Flying New Zealand. And this is ridiculous. It just shouldn't be allowed. It's a bad thing. You're showing such disrespect for the 2/3 of the hobby who see model flying New Zealand as of no value at all. And I side with them, obviously. So there we go. That's my contribution to commenting on the regulations. I've probably made a few people angry, but hey, it's a free country. You can express your opinion. And I hope that I've brought something to this that, stands to actually improve things, because what people have to remember is we're dealing with a natural resource. This is the airspace. It's the air that surrounds us. And it is a natural resource. It's not like a road that's been made. It's not like, the other things that we might create and therefore have to pay for. This is a natural resource that it's existed long before we were here. So everybody in the country should be entitled to the use of this natural resource, bearing in mind respect for the rights of others. Now, at the moment, the way things stand with regulations is that the amount of rights you have to use the airspace is pretty much dependent on the price of your toys. If you fly a expensive full-size aircraft, then you can fly over people's property without permission. You can do all sorts of things, and it's great. You've got all these rights and privileges. If you choose to buy a model of an aeroplane and spend, say, $400 instead of $400,000, well, you have bugger all rights. You're just toys. But hang on, I pay my taxes. I'm a citizen. Why can't I have equal right to use the air as somebody else? Simply because, why should they have more rights? Because they pay more money for their toys. It's not egalitarian, it's not fair, it's not right. So we need to address that. And this is one thing that annoys me about the general thrust of CAA. They believe that model flyers will always be in the wrong if anything happens. Now, I believe that people should take responsibility for themselves as well as responsibility for protecting others. So I always fly my models, when I was able to, in such a way that I don't pose a danger to anybody. As I've said, over 50 years flying, never injured anybody, never damaged any third-party property. That's a record, I'm proud of. So I believe that if I stay under 400 feet when I'm away from an airfield and away from designated low-flying areas, then I should have a right to use that airspace. I should have a right to use it, because full-size pilots are supposed to be 500 feet and above. Now, if they choose to break the regulations and knowingly endanger their own lives by flying below 400 feet, where they may hit a model, that's not my responsibility. Of course, I would take every measure to avoid any kind of collision like that, but we have to draw the line. We have to say pilots are responsible for their own safety. It's just like I don't see why pedestrians should be responsible for the safety of car drivers. We shouldn't make a pedestrian liable if someone decides to drive on the footpath, hits them, and they come through the window and injure them. It's not the pedestrian's fault, it's the driver's fault. So why is it always going to be the model flyer's fault if some full-size pilot chooses to disobey the regulations and enter the airspace, which is effectively reserved for models? These are things, it's time we stood up for our rights and made it very clear that if we don't stand up for our rights, we don't get any. These regulations, the regulations that have been passed show that. Our rights as model flyers have been stripped. We can't do a damn thing without permission. That's not good enough. There you go. That's my rant for today. If you've got questions, comments, stick them on the bottom. If you are from another regulator in another country, then I hope you've looked at the process I've looked at and the problems, and identifying the real core of those problems and how you can address those in a practical, effective way. And it's not just rolling out more regulations. I've already shown you that's just not going to work. You need to look at the real issues, study human behaviour, get a psychologist on board instead of, a tea lady. See how you get on then. Thank you for watching. Now I've got other work to do. I will catch everybody later. And I'm doing a safety video. Well, no, actually, I should explain. I had planned to do a safety video showing people over and above the regulations how to safely use these toys, these models, and these drones, because it's important. As I said, knowledge is in education, that's the important thing. These are things that really practically improve safety far more than any rules, which people are free to ignore at their wish. So I wanted to do a video to show people how to safely use all this gear. Now, the utter irony is that because of the effect of the new regulations, I can't do that. I have been prohibited effectively from demonstrating to you how to safely use these craft because I'm not able to fly. The irony is astounding, and that shows just how bad these regulations are when the one person in the country who's working so very hard to educate and inform the people who potentially pose a risk to person and property is prohibited from doing so by the very regulations that are supposed to make the place safer. Work it out for yourself, people. Gotta go.